So imagine for a moment that every cell in your body, imagine that the cells in your body are like the houses on a street. So we're going to imagine that each house is a cell and that the people inside each house, they have to stay inside the house, so they're not able to go in and out of the house, but they're able to communicate in and outside of the house. So now imagine that every house on the street, you know, you have a street full of houses, and the houses are filled with people. Those people wish to communicate to each other or between each other. So, for example, if they want to speak to the neighbors, so they can't go in and out of the house, so they have to communicate between the houses. So now imagine for a moment if you wanted to talk to the neighbors down the road, your next door neighbor, the neighbor across the street, the neighbor on the other side of the road, at the other end of the road, well, you would need to have some mechanism that would allow you to communicate. So imagine like we're not living in a time where we have mobile phones and we only have landlines, right? So landlines are the only form of communication that exists between houses. So now in order to have a phone network that allows you to speak to anybody in any of the houses, you'd have to be connected to each house, right? So you can either be connected to each house individually or you can be connected to like a central network. And so all the houses plug into a network and then each house can talk to each other. So now imagine you've got a local phone network. So if you want to talk to the houses on your street, you just dial into the phone network and it connects you to the house that you're wanting to talk to. Now imagine for a moment that that wire that connects you to the local phone network, that's a bit like glycan. And so for the local phone network, you need to have a connection that allows you to connect to the phones that are in the houses near you locally. Now imagine there's a limit to that technology, right? So that particular wire that goes between each house, you can only use that to speak to houses that are up to 10 houses away, right? And now imagine if you wanted to speak to houses that were further away, well, you would have to have something that allows you to connect to those houses. Now, I take that back. Imagine you just want to talk to people in other houses, so you've got a network that allows you to plug into and speak with any other house in the network. So now imagine the glycans that you have on the surface of each cell. There's a form of glycan, one glycoform, glycostructure, that is designed to just communicate with other cells that are the same as it, right? So if it's a liver cell, then all the other liver cells, they can all talk to each other using this particular glycan structure, this glycoform, right? And all these glycoforms, they're made up using sugars, right? So different sugars are used by the cells to create, in different combinations, different glycan structures. And those structures, like phone lines, allow you to speak to any other cell that's of the same type of cell as you. Now imagine that you need to speak to a hospital. Now, you can't physically, if you're a liver cell in the body, you can exactly leave the liver and go to the heart or something, or go to the kidney or something. So you'd need to communicate from where you are, and you'd have to ask them to send you the resources. So because you can't leave the house, right? So imagine that you've basically gone and dialed the hospital, right? Now the hospital doesn't accept phone calls from houses on the house phone network, right? So the phone line you have at the moment, there's a hole in your house. The cable's wired through and it connects the houses. But when you want to speak to the hospital, that doesn't really help because the hospital doesn't use that system. Because the hospital has to deal with so much more than just talking to other houses. So the hospitals have a hospital phone network. And now in order to get the hospital phone network installed, you need to get a hole drilled into your house. And then you need to have a wire put through the hole. And that wire, imagine the phone network that you've got between the houses, that's just using a simple coaxial cable. And now the hospitals, they're using fiber optic. And so in order to get fiber optic, well, you need to then have fiber optic cable. You need to convert the fiber optic cable into something that your house can communicate with. So you've got the old school phone system, so you can convert the fiber optic cable into a coaxial cable, and then once it's inside the house, well, the coaxial cable will plug into your existing phone system inside the house. So then from the house, you've got your coaxial cable that goes to the other houses, and now you've got fiber optic cable that connects you to the hospital. So now if you want to talk with the hospital, you need to have a fiber optic cable and you need to have a coaxial cable. So now imagine that the fiber optic cable, that's a different type of glycoform. So obviously it's a different material, it's a different interface, and so, but you need it to connect into the cell. So, the cell uses coaxial cables, the house uses coaxial cables, so you bring the fiber optic into the house, and then you connect it with coaxial, so the cell's then able to communicate with it. Now, when you talk to the hospital, imagine that you can't dial out, right? You can only receive incoming calls. So, and the hospital, they don't just call, because they have to physically come and plug into each cable. So what they do is they send a bus out every day, and it goes down the road, and it physically taps every cable. And when it does, it touches the cable and it asks, do you need any assistance? And then, those people living in a house that need medical assistance, they can respond. And then when they do, then the hospital bus, the ambulance, there we go, the ambulance can then touch the houses and be like, okay, the house that needs assistance, they let them know, and then they can supply them whatever medical assistance they need. And because they've got the ambulance, they've got all the drugs and everything that they could possibly need, and so they go into the house from the ambulance, give it whatever it needs, and then basically the cell's then healthy again, right? Now imagine for a moment that not every house has a fiber optic connection, and the cell goes past, and there's a house that has no fiber optic connection on it. So then the hospital, even though it wants to help, it can't talk to the house because the ambulance can only speak using fiber optic cables, because that's what the hospital uses to communicate. Now, why would that happen? Well, if there's not enough cable left, then the houses at the end of the road won't get the connection. And so if you imagine, if there's not enough sugars in the body, then in the absence of those sugars, those glycoforms, they can't be those glycan structures that are on the surface of the cell, they don't exist, right? So where you have a shortage of sugar, so then you have a shortage of glycans, and where you have a shortage of glycans, well, then the cell has to prioritize which glycans exist and which ones don't, or I don't know exactly how it decides, but you've only got space for, well, you've got the hole, you're able to drill the hole, but you don't have enough fiber optic cable, so you only have coaxial cable, so you can only connect with other houses, and even though you want to talk to the hospital, until somebody gives you some fiber optic cable, you're stuck, right? So that's kind of okay, there's not enough sugar in the body, there's not enough glycans in the body, so let's just use what we have, and then when we get more, then maybe the neighbors will share or something, right? So anyways, now imagine for a moment that you need to get a builder in, right? And again, as a house, you can communicate on the coaxial cable, so the home network, and you can communicate on the fiber optic cable to the hospitals, but the home construction companies, they can. No, so let's go food delivery. Okay, actually, let's go food delivery. Everyone's going to need food delivery, right? So every cell, it needs to get food delivered, right, on a regular basis, so that all the people that are living in each cell they can eat. Now imagine that the food delivery system, well, they don't use fiber optic because that's just too advanced, and they don't use coaxial because coaxial is just to talk between houses. So now imagine that the food delivery companies and the food delivery services, well, they're using an internet connection, right? And so for that internet connection, they need an Ethernet cable, right? So you have the coaxial cable to call between phone lines in the houses, between houses. You've got fiber optic to be able to speak to the hospital. But if you want to speak to any food companies or any food delivery services, you have to use an Ethernet cable, right? Now the Ethernet cable, it plugs you straight into the internet, right? Into the network for the internet. And only food companies are allowed to use the internet, right? So they're the only ones that use the internet, that use Ethernet connections, right? So now imagine that you want to order some food. And so you have to go onto the internet, right, using the Ethernet cable. And then you're able to pick whatever food you need. And then what happens again, because the food companies, like you can't talk to the food companies. You have to wait for the food companies to drive down the road. And when they drive down the road, then before they arrive, they're sending a signal on the Ethernet connection to say we're about to come. So that way, if you have a request, you can put that request in. And then when you put that request in, then they know to stop at your door and they know what to deliver to you, right? So, but imagine for a second, right? So everybody can get the holes put into the house. So everyone can get a hole drilled in, but they ran out of Ethernet cable, right? So they didn't have enough Ethernet connectors. So like the cable, like it's there, but like you can't plug into anything because the Ethernet connector at the end of the cable isn't there. And so now you're stuck because you've got the cable, but you don't have the connector in the end. And so now imagine, like the glycan, the glycoforms that exist on the surface of the cell. Imagine that part of those glycoforms, there's a bit missing, right? So that's like saying, oh, well, you've got fructose, but you don't have mannose, right? So one of the sugars is missing. So then that cable can't be fully properly terminated. So then, whilst the glycoform might exist in theory, it's not a complete glycoform. So then the communication signal can't go through, right? And no matter how many times you shout zeros and ones at the cable, because the Ethernet cable uses zeros and ones to communicate. But no matter how much you shout zeros and ones down the cable, it's not going to get picked up and it's not going to be understood because it's not gone through an Ethernet socket that it needs to be able to turn it into a digital signal that can be used on the internet. So now, every time the food company goes down the road, some of the houses, they don't get food deliveries because they can't talk. They're missing the signal. And so that's where, like, for example, cells in the body where the nutrients aren't being delivered. Well, that's because the glycoforms on the surface of the cell, they're not able to absorb the glucose, right? Now, one of the potential reasons could be, because someone's gone and stuck a coaxial cable down where the Ethernet cable should be. So now you can talk to like more houses. You've got 2 phone lines coming into the house, but you can't talk to any of the food delivery services. Well, so this is what fat does, right? So fat basically blocks up the entrance to the cell, and it stops the glucose from going into the cell. So if you then take the fat out, if you say no more fat, right, we're not going to have fat here, then the glucose can come in. And so just like the cells in just like the houses in the road, they need to have holes in them for the glycoforms to come out of. And if you don't have the right cables in there, then they can't bring in the right information, they can't communicate the right information. And if the wrong information's there, then imagine you're putting a food order in and it's going to the hospital. Well, the hospital's not going to deliver you food. They're going to be like, no, we don't have that. Okay, we'll just ignore them then. And actually, they didn't have food, but they had medical supplies. And now imagine you got your wires crossed. Then you're asking the hospital for food, and you're asking the food companies for hospital supplies. Well, the food company's not going to know what to deliver as a hospital supply, and the hospital doesn't know what to deliver as a food supply because they only deal with medical supplies. So now you've got this breakdown in the communication that's happening, and that's like plugging a coaxial cable into a fiber optic cable without a converter, right? So you force it in, and it's like you just make it go into the cable, make it go into the hole that the cable is meant to go into, but there's no translation between them. So again, glycoforms, they act as translators, as communicators, as mechanisms to change from one message to another, and different glycoforms interact with different passers-by. So the white blood cells, they'll have different glycoforms, and they'll be communicating with the cells in a different way to red blood cells, or to the immune system, macrophages and viruses. And so sometimes what happens in the cells is that a virus will come along and it'll pretend it's a hospital, right? And so then once it gets a foot in the door, it'll be like, oh, we'll just steal all of the medical supplies that you have and we'll use it for ourselves, right? So that's the sort of thing like cancer, for example, right? So cancer could be potentially from viruses. And so then once the cancer infiltrates a cell, then it's like, oh, let's make ourselves at home here, and it eats up everything inside the cell that it can, and then it goes and tries to steal from the neighbors as well. Now, the reverse of that, now imagine, for example, you've got a food delivery service, and you're basically trying to deliver food to everybody, right? And you want to give food to everyone, but not everybody's got the correct wiring, right? So even though you're delivering over the internet, the requests for food, you're servicing them over the internet. Not every cell can ask for it, because not every cell has Ethernet connections. So then what happens is that all this food is going past the houses, and all these people are sat in these houses hungry, but they don't know how to ask for food because they don't have the right connection, or they have an Ethernet connection, but then they don't speak the Ethernet language. They don't speak the internet language, and so they're still speaking hospital language, but they're trying to speak the hospital language down the Ethernet connection, and actually they need a translator. And so again, this is where the sugars come in. The different sugars, they create new glycoforms, which then allow the cell to be able to speak a different language, or be able to communicate with a different delivery service or different supplier. And so in that way, if you imagine every house on the street, they have holes in the houses. Some of those holes, they have all the perfect cables, all the right cables, and they're able to speak to all the different suppliers for all the different services that they need. Now, some of the houses, they have the holes, but they don't have enough cables, and so you end up having, like, unwelcome visitors. The mice come in, the wind comes in, the rain comes in, because there's nothing filling up the hole. And in some situations, you have the cables, but just you don't have the technology inside the house to communicate through that cable, and so that's where you need to have a translation of that cable. So from a fiber optic cable to whatever your phone system is, to for the internet connection, you need to have like the language that they're speaking for food delivery companies, and not the language that they're speaking in the hospital for medical supplies. So in that way, each of those steps, they use sugars to create these different glycoforms and to then act as like codes, which then you have to decipher each code in order to be able to communicate with different cells. And so when you don't have enough sugars in the body, then basically these glycoforms that every cell needs to communicate, there's a shortage of them. And so what happens is, so then the cells can't do their job fully. They're not able to perform at their optimal level. And so then imagine, half the houses on the street, they're not getting repaired, they're not getting fed, they're in need of medical attention, and they're not getting all the help and support they need. So then obviously the street's going to start to break down, isn't it? The quality of houses on the street, that's going to start to deteriorate. Versus a street where all the cells are able to, all the houses are able to communicate with all the supplies they need, and they're able to get everything they need, all the help they need, and what have you. And so that's going to be a really healthy street, right? So in the same way, in the different organs in the body, in the different parts of the body, obviously the heart is, the most critical function, right? The heart and the brain. Between the two of them, they're kind of the most critical, right? And so they obviously get priority. They get whatever they need as the priority. And so everything else is secondary to that. And so all the other functions in the body, all the other organs, all the hormones and everything else that are working away, they're secondary to service to the heart and the brain. Because obviously without the brain, then you're not able to function, and without the heart, there's no pump to the whole system, right? And so, like, in that way, when you don't have enough of the right sugars in the body, the body has to prioritize which sugars are being used, and like which ones it manufactures first. And if it has to physically manufacture, like, the body is very resourceful, right? So it will, whatever sugars it gets, it will make use of, and but if it has to spend all of its time making more sugars, then obviously it's not going to be able to use them in the same way as if it had all the sugars already provided, supplied, and it just files them out and just uses them, right? So imagine you have to start creating your own sugars, so the body will take whatever sugars it does get and it'll convert them into whatever forms it needs. Versus if you're just filling the body with all the sugars that it could need, then it can just go ahead and start using them. So in that regard, where you've got like, glycans, you replenish your glycans, then your body basically can perform at a more optimal level. And so the sugars that we're eating, one of the potential benefits to the body could be not just that, there's no fat in the system, because when there's fat, then, the sugars aren't being able to, the sugars stay stuck in the blood, right? Glucose can't leave the blood, and so you have high glucose levels. Now, if the cells are able to uptake the glucose, then obviously high glucose levels aren't an issue, and this is where insulin sensitivity is normally registered, right? However, if the cells are able to fully absorb the nutrition from the blood, and fat isn't blocking the glucose from entering the cells, then no matter what sugars you're eating, the sugar will, get streamlined straight into the cell as a fuel, and that fuel will then get used by the cells to create all these glycoforms and glycoproteins, as well as metabolize the glucose as a fuel. So this is a possibility, like it's just a theory, but this might be one of the ways in which the cells in the body respond to more sugar in the diet. In the absence of fat, they're able to upregulate their consumption of glucose as a fuel, as sugars as fuels, and then they're able to put those to work for the cells to then perform at their optimal level. And obviously, where there's a regular supply of this, then it doesn't need to store it, so then it gets used as a fuel and then it burns, right? And so then people that are eating, high sugar diets, they're basically giving the body fuel, right? Like it's already the optimized high performance fuel. So like when you go to a petrol station and you choose fuel, right? You can choose diesel or unleaded, and then you can choose like regular unleaded or like the power version, right, or the optimized version. And what does the optimized version do? It cleans the engine out whilst you're using it. It burns at a better rate, so you get better performance from the vehicle, and it takes care of the engine a bit better, right? So like that difference in where you get your fuel from and the difference of the quality of the fuel will then dictate on the performance of the car and how long the car will run and stuff. So in the same way, when you're getting lots and lots of sugar in, you're basically streamlining the most optimal fuel source for your cells. And if that's the case, then naturally you'd think the cells will be healthier, right? So that's what's happening. People are losing weight. Because why do we store weight? Well, there's some theories that the body traps toxins in fat cells. There's one theory, there's some theories that say that, all the surplus fuel that the body doesn't need to use straight away, that gets stored. But like typically fat gets stored, right? Glucose gets burned. So if you're eating both glucose and fat, well, obviously the fat's going to get stored. And so then the glucose doesn't have a chance, like it can't go in. It's not allowed in. Fat takes priority, right? Fat is always the VIP. But if fat isn't there, if fat isn't in the party, it's not in the line even, then obviously all the regular people can come in, right? So then that glucose gets mainlined into the cells. And maybe that's what's happening. Maybe that's the mechanism behind it. And then as those cells absorb the glucose, well, the cells start to perform in a healthier manner. They're able to use that fuel as a source. They're able to take those sugars, turn them into these glycoforms. They're able to communicate better between each cell. And then as everybody gets healthier, as the cells get healthier, and they're using that glucose and mobilizing that glucose, then it keeps being passed around and shared, and kind of gets to who's the most critical one that needs help first. And then as a sort of matter of triage, it kind of prioritizes that. And as your systems get repaired and recovered, then obviously overall your health improves, because we are the health of our cells, right? Healthy cells, healthy body, healthy person. So anyways, that's one theory on how the cells are communicating. And it's my theory, right? Like I pieced it together from what I've studied and understood around glycans and glycoproteins. And this isn't something I just came across. Over 20 years ago now, I first was introduced to this idea that sugars can actually be a powerful healing tool, and that actually if we get enough of the right sugars into our body, that our body can naturally recover. And so as much as it's been in contradiction to kind of the mainstream advice and kind of, cut back on your carbohydrates and you should eat proteins and fats because it doesn't spike your blood glucose levels, I think that's always been a bit of a red herring, because the reason why blood sugar levels spike is not because of what you've eaten, it's because of what you've metabolized. This is my take on it, right? So in the absence of fat, the glucose gets metabolized by the cell straight away. If there's fat in the diet, if there's fat in what you've consumed, the fat takes priority. And in so doing, it then stops the glucose from leaving the blood sugar, the blood, right? So then the blood sugar levels go up. And this is the problem that diabetics have. It's not that they have high blood sugar levels, it's that the blood sugar, the sugar in their blood isn't being used by the cells. And so, the team behind Mastering Diabetes, Robbie and formerly Cyrus, he's not there now, but he was there for a while. They've developed, what they took from, I think it was McDougall, is the guy that does the 80-10-10 diet. And they followed his approach and basically, predominantly fruit based. And, they got their health back on track. They've helped thousands of people, literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of people possibly, with their work and with their materials and with their coaching programs. They've directly helped countless patients reverse their diabetes completely. And so it's not just a fad, it's not just something overnight. This has been around for decades, right? It's just becoming popularized because, there's the cut through, right? And the marketing of it, right? The packaging up of it. But fundamentally, this isn't something new, this isn't something foreign, that just suddenly is a fad or a trend. This has been around since the early 1900s as knowledge, right? That in the absence of fat, the body utilizes glucose. And, in the presence of fat, the fat gets uptaken rather than the glucose. So this isn't new news. Even Walter Kempner back in the 1960s at Duke University was setting up these rice diet houses and literally helping hundreds of people every week reverse hypertension, kidney disease, and ultimately obesity as well, from just eating a plant-based diet, a sugar-based diet. And so I kind of want to just leave it there for now, but I feel like it's important to consider that just because it's new to us now, maybe it's not new at all. It's just we'd forgotten about it, or we'd let it slip, or it just wasn't even in our awareness before. But as people are getting results, as the world of fasting and intermittent fasting is kind of evolving and growing, and people are discovering that certain food groups work better than others, and their performance is directly dictated by what they're fueling themselves with. Whereas somebody who's bedbound and in need of losing weight, I haven't found anything as effective as just eating fruit, cutting out the fat, and just, staying whole foods, plant-based. And so on that note, I'm going to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm going to appreciate any questions you might have. If you want to comment those below, then I'll be doing my utmost to answer or respond to those in upcoming videos. And I appreciate you taking the time to have a listen to my thoughts and ideas on the role of sugar in the cells in the body and the importance of it. And personally, I take products to replenish the full spectrum of glycans, so not just having sugars that are from one food group, but from a variety of different plant sources. And if you want to know more about that, then I'll refer to some resources that you can go to learn more about the glycan technologies I use. But I'm just so committed now to following a high sugar diet to reverse my own health challenges, primarily the obesity at this stage. And having been bedbound for 5 years, I can tell you now, it's not for lack of trying. There's so many things I've tried and so many things I've wanted to execute on, but this is the easiest thing I've found so far, and oh my God, it makes everything so much simpler. So I encourage you to be your own take responsibility for your health, right? Be your own guide, and by all means speak to others for counsel, but make your own decisions, right? Nobody has the right to tell us that they know better than us what's right for us, right? If they know better, then it's their responsibility to educate us. But ultimately, we're the ones that have to live with the decisions of what we follow and what we don't, of what we do and what we don't do. And so, in that spirit of taking ownership and responsibility, I invite you to consider that the only person who really knows what's going to work is you, right? Because you have to find something that fits with your life, with your mindset, with your requirements, with your outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Nobody else can take that priority from you. Unless potentially you're not of sound mind and then need some help. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. For now, just, stay strong, whoever you are, wherever you are. If you've watched this, you probably have some challenges you're looking to overcome, be it weight, be it health challenges, whatever that is. And thank you for listening. I appreciate you taking the time. And if this is useful or helpful, I'll certainly do more. But for now, I hope that's given some context and hopefully it makes sense. This is kind of new to me, so I'm still figuring it out as I go. When I say new to me, as in talking to camera and piecing together what I want to share and just making sense of my ideas and theories and putting them out there in the world to see how they percolate and stir conversation or not at all. And no doubt there's many people with different opinions and perspectives to mine. And I invite you to listen to them all and find what you resonate with, what makes sense to you, and what you can adhere to. So on that note, I'm going to love you and leave you. Bye for now.